You're listening to a Raconteur Studios podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the After Hours Skin Clinic. I'm consultant dermatologist Dr Emma Craythorne and your host, where I take these big dermatology questions that I'm usually brought in a coffee shop queue or a late night text from a friend and break them down in a way that actually makes sense. And in today's episode, it's a subject that's really quite close to my heart, and it's relevant because tomorrow is International Rare Disease Day. We're going to be diving into a condition that most people have probably never heard of, Xeroderma Pigmentosum, or XP. But before we dive into XP, I quickly want to say that if you're enjoying these episodes and like what we stand for here at the After Hours Skin Clinic, then please do me a favour and click subscribe. We're just starting out and it really helps us grow and reach more people. My team and I would really appreciate your support. Anyway, enough of that and on with the episode. So tomorrow is International Rare Disease Day, and I want to do my bit in raising awareness for this because these conditions are affecting about 300 million people across the world. Although this doesn't sound like a very rare disease then, we have to think of that there are about 7,000 rare diseases. The one I'm diving into is one that's particularly close to my heart because it's one I work directly with. And this is the condition Xeroderma Pigmentosum, or XP, we'll call it for short. This is a really ultra rare condition and it affects only probably about 115 people in the UK. And how it works is it changes the body's response to ultraviolet radiation. And here's the thing, while XP is incredibly rare, we're all exposed to ultraviolet radiation. And patients with XP really teach us very clearly about what happens to the skin in response to damage from UV, how we should really be protecting our skin from the sun, and to understand that this element of genetic repair is really profoundly relevant to everyone. I want to take you into a world where daylight isn't safe. Now, I'm not talking about sunlight on a sunny day. I am talking about daylight. So every step that you take outside has to be very carefully calculated. Every step that you take that's close to a window or close to some indoor lighting that we have can potentially damage your skin. And this is an area where the science that we currently know about, the resilience of patients with this, and the innovation and intersection of both of these things come together in a way that's incredibly fascinating. I want to tell you a little bit about where I work. So one of the most wonderful parts of the job that I have is in the Rare Disease Centre, and that's situated in St Thomas's Hospital as part of the Institute of Dermatology. And this place was built only a few years ago, and this beautiful space was created to make life much easier for patients who have rare diseases. On the day that I work there, it's all focused on Xeroderma pigmentosa. And it means that patients who have XP can come to the clinic and be met by the genetic specialist, the dermatologist, the dermatology surgeon, that's me, the ophthalmologist, the paediatrician, the neurologist, and the patient can meet all of these specialists in one day rather than the patient having to go to different hospitals or different areas. It just makes life much easier. And it also means for these specialists, we're all together on this one day. And it's that collaboration that really drives research forward in these rare diseases. And on the day I'm there, I am one of the dermatologists for patients who have XP. And my particular interest is in the changes that have happened in the skin and often having to cut a lot of these skin cancers out and prepare and teach patients how to look after their skin properly to protect themselves from ultraviolet radiation. So everyone's going probably, what on earth is Xeroderma pigmentosum? What is XP? Well, this is an autosomal recessive genetic condition, and that means that a child has to inherit 2 faulty copies of a gene, one from each parent, to have the condition. So neither parent will know that they're carrying a copy of the gene, as they themselves don't have XP and probably nobody else in their family had XP. So when they have a child who has XP, that is very unexpected. When somebody has XP, it means that their body isn't able to repair DNA damage in their cells that's caused by ultraviolet radiation. So for most of us, most of you listening, the sun will cause mutations in our skin cells all of the time, but our DNA repair mechanisms quickly come in and repair that damage. But in patients who have XP, those repair processes simply don't work. And it means that they're exposed then to ultraviolet radiation that can't be repaired, and they get earlier skin aging. They get skin burning. I mean, very blistering sunburn can happen in response to a very small amount of sunlight or even daylight. And as a consequence, they get a very high risk of skin cancer, developing around the age of 3 or 4. I'm going to take a slight scientific deep dive into this to really do this condition justice. So XP is caused by these changes in the genes that are involved with this repair pathway. So I want you to think of your DNA a little bit like a giant instruction manual that tells your body exactly how to work. And in the skin, every time you go out in the sun, the UV light acts like a little highlighter, and it makes random words in the manual. And if you imagine too many words in that manual being highlighted and nobody rubs them out, it gets harder and harder to read, and that's when things go wrong. So most people will have this repair crew that will come in and fix things, and that repair crew is called the nucleotide excision repair pathway. And it's made up of these very specialised protein workers that come in, cut out the damage or the highlighted abnormal words, and get those out of the way so that the manual can be read clearly again. But the genetic problem that happens in people with XP is that their repair crew is either broken and it's not working very well, or in some cases it's missing entirely. What then happens is the DNA isn't able to be read properly, or it's read a little bit properly and you don't get quite the same repair. And if too many of these mistakes keep piling up, well then those skin cells start to multiply out of control. And that is how the skin cancer starts. In some type of patients who have XP, especially with certain kinds of mutations, so not all patients who have XP, just a certain number of them, the same kind of thing can also happen not just to their skin cells, but also to their brain and their nerve cells, meaning that these cells don't repair themselves as easily over time. And what happens is you then start to get damage in the nerve cells, meaning that there are memory problems, there's difficulty in moving, hearing loss, and a gradual decline in those kind of nerve functions. When it happens in the nerves, this is as a consequence of oxidative stress. XP is often really picked up in childhood, and for some groups of patients with XP, they get a very blistering sunburn. So it might be the child who's in a pram, and the child has fallen asleep with the blanket over their legs, but the bottom part of their feet is exposed, and it's not a particularly sunny day, and just in a very small amount of daylight, it can result in sunburn. And if that happened to be a fairly sunny day, not necessarily a hot day, but a sunny day, those feet may end up blistered and require admission to hospital because of the severe damage that gets caused. Another way XP gets identified is in and around the age of about maybe 3 to about 7, where there is this change of freckling on the exposed parts of the body. So you see a lot of freckling appearing, particularly on the faces, and the freckling is in a different pattern to what we would see in the case of normal freckling of the skin. And often it can be associated with little lumps or bumps appearing in the skin, and sometimes skin cancers. So that's another way in which patients are detected. Sometimes for some forms of XP, it's not even picked up until somebody is in their maybe 20s or 30s, because they have a bit of repair in this nucleotide excision repair pathway. And so you get some repair, and they haven't had this very extreme blistering response, or they haven't had lots and lots of freckling, but they start to get skin cancers in and around their 20s or 30s. XP is divided up into these different subgroups. We call them XPA, XPB, XPC. And each of these subgroups have specific findings attached with them. And what we've discovered while working in the Rare Disease Centre, you can predict, depending on which XP type you are, which of the symptoms you're likely to get. And that's just one of the amazing examples of being able to work together and collaborate whenever diseases are so rare, and why whenever something like International Rare Disease Day is in the diary, that this raises awareness for people to understand these rare diseases and perhaps understand if they were ever in a situation to meet somebody they thought may have one of these rare diseases, how to interact and how to understand that subject a little bit more. But crucially, for doctors and healthcare professionals working with these rare diseases, only by collaborating with other countries are we able to then draw parallels. And because the patient population is so small, no single country really has enough cases to discuss these large-scale studies. It's really important to have this international cooperation, not just for research, but also for sharing best practices and developing new treatments and improving our patient support. Organisations worldwide, and in the UK particularly the XP Society and other rare disease advocacy groups, they play such a vital role in connecting patients and families and researchers and convey the message of patients back to us as the doctors and researchers, so that that collaboration can really move things forward. Not everybody has skin signs. Not everybody has the neurological signs I talked about. And I think it's really important to understand the division between the two of these. Because whenever you go on to an internet search, for example, and look up the term XP, which you can do after listening to this podcast, you'll be met by a lot of images that are not necessarily reflective of the condition today. Even if you go onto something like Wikipedia, which is quite hard to change that information on there and can be quite alarming whenever a young teenager might see that the mortality rate of this condition is in the 20s or 30s, when that actually isn't necessarily true. So I think that having this better understanding and having correct information on all of these Google searches is incredibly important, not only for that young teenager who's going on to try and find information, but also for the families of that teenager or the public in general. Having exact information about these conditions is so important. Sometimes people with these very rare conditions, especially visible ones like XP, often face a lot of social stigma. And, we as humans are really naturally wired to notice a difference in someone else's face. And unfortunately, that can lead to a lot of misunderstanding or exclusion or even fear of that person. So imagine you're diagnosed with XP and you're growing up in a world where you feel judged, particularly in your young teenage and young adult years. Every step that you're taking outside has to be calculated. The most important thing for you to protect your skin and your eyes is to keep yourself out of exposure to ultraviolet radiation. So your lifestyle is changed around. You are conditioned to want to do more things indoors because that means that you don't have to deal with all of the palaver of getting ready to go outside. Often shifting what you might do until nighttime or whenever the sun has gone down. It also changes how you behave and changes the patterns of what you might be wanting to do. But also then when you leave the house as somebody with XP, you have to ensure that you have your skin covered. So you'll be wearing long-sleeved shirts, you'll have gloves on your hands to protect your hands, long-sleeve trousers and your feet covered. You'll also be advised to have your sun protection on your face because that's an exposed area. But even more than that, there are visors that our patients wear. And some of them can look a little bit like astronaut hats over the face with a glass visor in front. And some of the more modern ones are more like baseball caps and they have the glass visor down the front of them. And a lot of our patients with XP actually felt that whenever it was the time of COVID and everyone had masks on, that felt a lot easier to be in public because it seemed much more, and I'm putting little finger rabbits up to say, normal experience. But it is something to think about how different some people must feel. Newer visors are being developed all of the time, but the real visor that seems to sit best with most people is the visor that has almost been made themselves. One of the patients had a grandmother who attached a visor to a baseball cap and had material that was UPF protected around the sides. UPF is a kind of material that does not let the sun through or light through at all, so the skin is therefore protected. And that one still sits probably true for most of the patients that I see in the clinic. So if there's engineers out there, textile makers, designers who are able to come up with a really comfortable idea that our patients could wear, I think that that is something that they would really, really benefit from. One of the things that happens with understanding so much about a rare disease like Xeroderma Pigmentosum, it actually brings back to what happens to all of us whenever we're exposed to ultraviolet radiation. So we all have a limit to what our cells can take. We all have the same nucleotide repair pathway. So whenever our skin gets hit by ultraviolet radiation, this repair pathway comes in to mop up the damage and let the cells behave normally. But if we get enough of those UV hits to the skin, and if our repair pathway starts to tire out a little bit, then what can happen is that our skin cells, in the same way, can start to undergo this damage and skin cancers form. So skin cancer develops as a consequence of these mutations building up in the cells. The cells stop following the normal growth rules, start dividing completely uncontrollably, and that's how we end up getting our skin cancer. So the XP almost serves as a model for a very accelerated form of how everyone's skin will behave in the sun given enough of the ultraviolet radiation. It also lets us see why we then get this increased melanin production, which happens to try and protect ourselves from the ultraviolet radiation. And that's why over time we get this abnormal pigmentation can occur, sunspots, freckling, and hyperpigmentation. One of the things that I think that probably people don't realise about ultraviolet radiation hitting the surface of our body is the damage that it can do to the eye. Our eye absorbs ultraviolet radiation too, and as a consequence, you can develop the same kinds of cancers around the surface of the eye. You can get something called cataracts, where the lens has become clouded and that can affect the vision. And something as well called photokeratitis, which is essentially like a little bit of a sunburn on the cornea. So these are things that can happen to all of us in response to ultraviolet radiation. And if you imagine in people who have XP, that's just happening in a much more accelerated form. And that's really why they have to be so diligent with their SPF and their complete protection from not just the sun, but from daylight. So here's what I really want you to take away from today, that XP is incredibly rare, but its lessons on UV damage really do apply to everyone. Like every condition, early diagnosis and UV protection are real game changers. Those things that help early detection are those children who are burning very easily in small amounts of light, and an abnormal amount of freckling is occurring at a very young age, or if skin cancers start to be picked up at a young age. These are all announcers for potential XP and really should be investigated. Ultraviolet radiation protection is absolutely key and paramount, and things like people saying that SPFs are toxic or dangerous, this is the thing that really gets my goat, because they're actually completely life-changing and life-saving for the people I've just been talking about. And global collaboration is incredibly essential to improve outcomes and understanding for these rare diseases. So days like International Rare Disease Day, which also highlights it to the public, is completely key. So do spread the word and let everyone you know listen to this, because in doing that itself, it's also spreading the word. As always, thank you for listening to the After Hours Skin Clinic. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it, especially today, as tomorrow is International Rare Disease Day. The more people understanding XP and being aware of all of the rare diseases out there, the more we can help support those people living with it. If you want to learn more about Xeroderma Pigmentosum, then I'll put all of the references into the show notes where you can find good and accurate information, as well as information about the XP Society. So if you have a question you'd like me to answer, or you want me to break down one of those common myths that you're seeing around, then please just get in contact, and all the details are in the show notes. So until next time, protect your skin, definitely wear your SPF, and keep asking and seeking out answers to these big questions. As always, this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not a substitute for medical advice. Please consult your healthcare professional before making a change to your treatment.